I have Kieran McAnulty, the Minister of Local Government and Emergency Management, with me today. Kia ora, Minister, and thanks for talking with me.
No worries at all.
Minister, also the MP for Wairarapa, which many will know stretches right up through Tararua and into parts of central Hawke's Bay. How are things in your region after Cyclone Gabrielle? Because some areas like Parongaha were quite badly affected.
Yeah, there are areas within the electorate that have been hit. The extent of Cyclone Gabrielle has meant that the top of the Northland all the way down the east coast to the bottom coast of South Wairarapa were hit. And the complexity of it means that every region and every area within a district have been hit differently. So obviously the Hawke's Bay, I think it's fair to say, is the most severely impacted, closely followed by Tairāwhiti. But also areas of the Tararua district and Wairarapa have been hit as well. So my role, both as local MP and as Minister responsible for not only Hawke's Bay but also Tararua and Wairarapa recovery, is to understand the needs on the ground and make sure that's known at Cabinet.
You've had quite a bit on, so have you had time to get on the ground and speak to people and see what the issues are?
Yeah, I have. I've made a point of being on the ground in Hawke's Bay at least once a week since taking on that ministerial lead role, and I've managed to follow through with that. Sometimes it's been more than once a week, but at least once a week, and obviously in Wairarapa and Tararua as well. So it certainly is busy, but it's obviously an incredibly important task and one that I'm up for. I think we see as support continues to roll out, that reflects the feedback that I'm passing on alongside my ministerial colleagues in other areas. Obviously, Gisborne, Tairāwhiti is of concern as well. They've recently had a local declaration of emergency with the weather 2 weekends ago. And whilst that didn't turn out to be as bad as we feared, it still showed that when the ground is as wet as it is, it can cause some damage even when it's not a lot of rain. We saw in that same event that State Highway 50 near Ongonga there was impacted with the bridge being closed while they have to fix the part leading up to it. So that's of concern at the moment, that the way things are, it's not going to take much weather to cause additional damage.
Because going forward with climate change, that's sort of two key issues that Cyclone Gabrielle raised, because no one predicted how bad it would be. So are we looking at a point where we almost have to prepare for any sort of serious storm that comes along, and also upgrade our infrastructure to a point where it's more than 1 in 500 year event or something like that?
There is no question that we all need to be prepared. This is a consistent message that civil defence at a local level and emergency management nationally have been communicating for some time, is that we all need to prepare for either a natural disaster or a severe weather event and prepare enough provisions for 3 days. It's asking people to consider having cash on hand if the power goes out, having enough water not just for ourselves but for pets, and the ability to cook food on a gas stove, be it a barbecue or a camping stove to have handy, things like torches and medications, etc., baby food if that's applicable. But of course, we do also know that with climate change, we are facing more severe and more frequent weather events. And that does cast into question our ability to prepare for that from an infrastructure perspective. Obviously, there are things we can do to mitigate large-scale weather events. But if we look at Auckland, for example, it is fair to say that there needs to be additional investment in stormwater infrastructure in Auckland. I think everyone agrees with that. At the same time, the Auckland flooding, they received almost 3 times their previous record. And when you're getting that level of rainfall, it's almost, it is difficult to prepare for that, because it's hard to comprehend that level of rain coming when the previous record was almost a third less of that amount. So I guess there's There's a lot to comprehend here, a lot to plan for, but also when it comes to investment decisions, it's difficult to understand exactly what is a level of resilience that's going to withstand it when the amount of rainfall and weather events we're seeing is almost beyond comprehension.
And it's also about the response. And you were down in Hawke's Bay last week. One of the things you announced was national inquiry into the cyclone response. And you've also got legislation going through at the moment. Why is it so important to get that response right?
Well, civil defence is always at a local level. That is the strength of our civil defence, in my view. But government does have a role in how it sets the legislative framework within which civil defence works. It also has a role in supporting local responses. So when there's a local emergency declared, NEMA provides additional support, so too does the broader region. But even at the level that we saw with Gabrielle, where a national state of emergency was declared, it's still primarily the role of the local civil defence on the ground with significant support from government. That's something that isn't widely understood, I believe, but it is important that the government has the settings right, that we have a good gauge of the level of resources that we provide and answer the question as to whether that is enough. Basically, we want to ensure that we are as ready as we can be. One thing I appreciate about the mindset of civil defence and emergency management in this country is that they're always looking to improve. No matter how small or large the event, there's always a review. They have the attitude that lessons don't always need to come from mistakes. There's always an opportunity to improve. And so that's the approach that we've taken with this. The emergency management bill that was introduced a week and a bit ago was the culmination of 10 years of lessons that have come from various events, starting from the Christchurch earthquake, the Kaikoura earthquake, and the various weather events we've had since. And it looks to refine things a wee bit. It's not a fundamental change because on the whole things work really pretty well, but there are things we can do to improve. The cruel irony was, however, that we were due to introduce that bill the week that Gabrielle hit. Then we had a question we had to answer. What do we do with the bill? We know that there's some lessons that would have improved things, but we also know that there's some lessons that are going to come out of Gabrielle that will also improve things moving forward. So where we've landed is we've introduced the bill. I've asked the Select Committee to consider extending the time in which they look at the bill so that with the government inquiry due to come back in March, they no doubt will have some recommendations as to how things could go better next time. Some of those recommendations will be addressed in the bill already and some won't. But by doing it this way, the Select Committee will be able to consider the recommendations that come from the inquiry. They will be able to make recommendations for further improvements to the bill, and that means that by the time the bill passes, not only will it have taken into account the lessons from the last 10 years, but also those that arise from Cyclone Gabrielle. So I'm confident that if we take that approach, then when the next event hits, we'll be in a much better place.
So this process, is it a forward-looking process, or if mistakes were made, were people responsible and those accountable for it be held to account?
Well, we know that there were things that could have been done better in the initial response. That's true for the Auckland floods. It's true for Cyclone Gabrielle. We also know that both of those are unprecedented events, and when unprecedented events occur, we're always going to have areas that we want to improve for next time. So we'll be reviewing the response to both of those events, and we'll be looking forward, considering what's already proposed in the bill, and then looking at additional recommendations. We take this very seriously. We know that we always can work to refine things, and that's the approach that we're taking in this. Very much an open mind. We're not going to shy away from anything. If there's something that needs to be improved, then we're up to doing that.
Now, just in terms of the costs of everything, and just speaking to you as local government minister, obviously the government is negotiating with Hawke's Bay and other councils to see who pays for the Category 3 property buyout scheme. I've heard that the councils wanted also to sort of evolve into a broader conversation about costs. You know, as local government minister, that a lot of these councils don't have much money. They're big areas and not many ratepayers. How are you going to help them? Because some of them are saying they got no money at all as a starting point. Where do you go from there as a government?
Well, this is not a new issue, and it's one that we have been working with the sector for some time. You'll note that there has recently been a report released as part of the review into the future of local government. This is a review that the sector themselves asked for, and we were happy to do that. It's also alongside other reforms that are underway, the water reforms, for example, and at the crux of that is that we recognise that councils by themselves can't afford the level of investment that will be required into our water services over the next 30, 50 years, and as such we needed to find a better way in which to do it, because ultimately ratepayers couldn't afford it otherwise, and also the resource management reforms, both of which, in principle, the sector support. Obviously, that always comes down to the detail. But the point of that is that we've been working with the local government sector the entire time that we've been in government to try and address the structural challenges that they face. The fact is that rates alone aren't enough for many councils to do what they're required to do, or is what's expected of them by their local communities. What I've said to the local government sector is over the next 4 or 5 months, they have an opportunity to go away, consider the recommendations of the report around the future of local government, and then after the election, sit down with me and we'll work through them and in good faith try and find a way forward to make local government sustainable. So that's the bigger issue. The more specific issue is around what role can government play to assist local government after a severe weather event. The fact of the matter is that it remains and always has been local government's responsibility around planning, around zoning and categorisation of land. What we weren't willing to do was leave the local government in Hawke's Bay and for the other affected areas to themselves, because we know they couldn't afford it. We said we would come in and assist with the cost, conscious that what we do in Hawke's Bay and other areas this time round is likely to set a precedent for how we go about it for future events. And so the conversations that are underway is largely being led by how much can you afford and how much can the government afford to assist you in buying these residential properties out. It's a big undertaking, but it's one that we're keen to assist with, but obviously we need to work out an amount that is both affordable and also pragmatic moving forward for future events.
So you mentioned the Future of Local Government review panel releasing its report. So were you happy with that report?
Oh, that was a very good report. It doesn't. That's not a commentary on this specific recommendations, because I'm wanting to wait and hear what the local government sector has to say on that. I promise that that's the approach I would take, and I'm going to stick to that. But as a report itself, I thought it was very good. It recognised the challenges that are facing the sector, and it came up with some recommendations as to how we might be able to address that. Obviously, we want to make sure that there is good engagement with local government, that local government continue to play a pivotal role in our communities moving forward, and that people continue to see the relevancy of local government. We want to make sure that the funding streams are sustainable. We also want to make sure that the legislative structure that local government works within is set right. We're committed to that, but what I didn't want to do was what has happened in the past. The government looks at the recommendations and says, we like this, we don't like this. We decide what we want to do and then go to the sector and say, what do you think? I wanted to flip it around. the local government sector has an opportunity now. There's 67 local councils in this country. It's going to be a difficult task to get agreement across the board, but if they can, through negotiation and conversation, have a consensus view on particular things, then obviously that's a great starting point to have a conversation about what changes need to happen.
Okay, just a few more questions. So when you came down last week, you also announced a package for growers, which, from speaking to growers, sort of went down a bit like a lead balloon, if you don't mind me saying that. They felt that it was just sort of, one person put it to me that it was more about guaranteeing the banks than the growers themselves. And some expected a bit of bailout money. You indicated that wasn't on the cards. What do you think of the reaction from growers?
Well, I think the reaction from growers has actually evolved. Of course, there was a lot of information to take in right from the start. There's subsequently been additional information that's come out to address some of the concerns and clarify things for them. The feedback that I've been getting that across the board and on the whole, that this is going to be of great assistance, not just to growers, but also farmers as well. Essentially, we need to ensure that those that can continue are given the best shot at doing that. There's three elements to this. It's not just about the banks. Obviously, the banks have a critical role to play here, and that we need to ensure that any lending that's done is done at a rate that people can afford. So for the government to come in and guarantee loans, that gives banks confidence to potentially lend to people that they wouldn't have done otherwise. And I don't think it's fair to say that isn't going to be of assistance, because if people couldn't previously get loans but now they can, that's obviously going to help them. In addition to that, there is concessionary loans available provided by the government for 10 years at very low rates and deferred interest. What that means is if you're a grower and you've had your trees completely whipped out, we recognise as a government that you're not going to be able to make money straight away, because it often takes 5 to 7 years for those trees to be mature enough to start producing fruit. If you're getting capital injection into your business to be able to invest in trees, and then you've got a 10-year window where you don't need to start worrying about paying that back, that means that you're going to have a productive business again before you need to start paying back that capital. And alternatively, we recognise that there are some smaller growers who might not want to take on more loans at the moment. They can take an equity cut from the government. So the government buys into their business up to 25%, and then over the next 5 years, as things start to return to normal, they can buy the government back out. A bit of a passive investment there. That suits some growers. Now, we've got to remember that this was done in consultation with the horticultural industry. They gave us feedback right throughout that this is going to assist the majority of viable businesses. And we also need to remember that what we do now will set the precedent for what we do in the future. And it's unrealistic, if we're honest, to have a bailout system this time round and then not say in the future, no, we're not going to do that because we can't afford to do it. We can't have that uncertainty. What will happen next time around is that people will have the certainty to say, this is how the government's going to help. I can make an informed decision that's best for my business, and that's exactly what people want. They want certainty, and they've got that now.
Minister, last issue quickly. You stand in for re-election as MP for Wairarapa. Have you started campaigning yet, and where are you finding the time to do that?
I haven't, is the honest answer. I simply don't have the time. What I hope, though, is that people see that I am on the ground, that I'm doing my job. There's a difference between getting in and doing it and getting around and campaigning. People can smell out a campaign handshake versus one that's genuine. And frankly, they elected me to do a job, and I'm doing it, and I hope they'll see that, and I hope they'll back me.
So why should voters choose you over the national candidate, Mike Butterick?
Well, from a Central Hawke's Bay and Tararua point of view, they don't have to look far back to remember when they had MPs that didn't even recognise that they existed. They were never on the ground at CHB or Tararua. They often only worried about Wairarapa. I promised that I wouldn't do that, and I've lived up to that promise. everything I campaigned on, I've delivered. We've got money for Route 52. I said I'd do that, and we did it. There's social housing come back to the region. I said I'd do that, and we've done that. There's a long list of things where I've made sure that the viewpoint and perspective of Central Hawke's Bay and Tararua has been represented in Parliament. It's something they haven't had for a long time, and I hope people will reward me for that because I stick up to I follow up with what I said I'd do.
Minister Kieran McAnulty, thank you for your time today.
Good on you. Appreciate the opportunity.